Hold on. Just for people who are never quite sure what TTIP is, what exactly is the implication, you're an economist, of TTIP on the NHS? Why is this an issue? Just explain in layman's language, if you would.
Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership is a binding treaty that gives, that says, look, we, Britain, have to, and Europe, have to open up our markets to American companies, and that if they are unfairly discriminated against, i.e. you cannot own the NHS, they can sue us in a court. So we have to exempt the NHS. I would exempt a lot of other stuff, and I would simply say we should veto TTIP in Europe, and it's probably likely to happen. I wouldn't see this as a leaving or staying in issue for Europe, but you know, we put the pressure on the Commission to veto it, and while I've got the floor, I will just do what you lot haven't done. There's a $28 billion pound tax gap in this country. We're not collecting at least 28, it could be 128. That money should be collected from the tax-dodging rich and used to pay for the NHS.
Okay. All right, now, we have 10 minutes left. You've made your point. We'll go on. Somebody mentioned Michael Gove on the other side of the table here, so let's have a question. We just might touch on him. It's Konrad Szymotsky, please. Konrad Szymotsky, right. Yes.
Prison reform has included suggestions that some prisoners would only go to prison at weekends and given iPads. Are we being soft on crime?
These are the suggestions that have come out from Michael Gove for reforms, and you may well have seen the pictures of the chaos in Wandsworth Prison and others of drugs being brought in by helicopter, no, by drones. Did you see all this stuff? Probably arranged by the department so that the position should be understood. Anyway, and the suggestion is work at home during the week and weekends in prison. Are we being soft? Yvette Cooper.
It depends, obviously, what the crime is that's been committed. Clearly, if people have committed violent crimes, serious crimes, abuse, then there has to be a proper sentence and the public has to be protected, but also victims need to feel that actually justice is being done. But there are other crimes, actually, that where you could have very different sentencing, where you don't end up having to have overcrowded prisons. So I think it's sensible to look at that kind of reform. It's sensible to look at educational reform and rehabilitation. But the real problem I have with what they announced this week is that actually what they were really talking about was just 6 prisons out of 130 would get some flexibility to do some more stuff, but nothing seriously to tackle the major overcrowding problems, the awful, really shocking images that we saw on the news last night of some of the things going on in Wandsworth prisons. You've got an increase of about a third in violent attacks on staff, increase of about a quarter of attacks on prisoners, suicide rates up, really shocking what's happening, and it's a consequence of having cut the number of staff by a third. You've got prisoners who are being locked in their cells for 23 hours at a time because there are not enough staff to look after them and to supervise them. Unless that is sorted out, all of these reforms are just going to be a con.
Konrad Szymotsky, who asked this question, you were a police officer, I think. Do you think we're being soft on crime?
I think we are. I think if you do the crime, you should do the time. I think it's no good. I don't believe that sending prisoners to prison at weekends only and let them have the week off to work. I don't think that's going to work. I think they have enough cushy time in prison that it is. And the other suggestion is giving them iPads as well. I think, well, how much is an iPad? I think it's a no-goer.
Paul Nuttall.
Well, the cynic in me thought that this announcement by Michael Gove was a bit of a publicity stunt, but I am prepared to give him the benefit of the doubt, simply because if you look at the statistics, only 1 in 4 prisoners who are released then go on and find employment. So if you keep them in employment, you will then integrate them better back into society. The other problem is that when they do come out, 46% of them go on to commit crime within a year. Those who are on shorter sentences, that jumps up to 60%. So there is a correlation between how long you spend in prison and the likelihood of you coming out and reoffending. So I want sentences to mean what they say. I don't want you to go down for 6 years and come out in 3. And I think if you go down for 6, you should serve 6 years, because in the end, we can have rehabilitation, but I think deterrents are just as important.
Are you still a believer in the death penalty?
Yes, I am. Like the majority of people in this country, I believe in the death penalty for people who go out and kill harmless children, and I make no apologies for holding that view. Can I also make one other point? The real issue that we've got with prisons here is that the budgets have been cut massively. So let me just give you this statistic. In 2000, for every one prison officer, there were 3 prisoners. Now, in 2015, there are 6 prisoners for every 1 prison officer. There was a 30% cut in prison officers since 2010. And my cousin's a prison officer, and he tells me all the time they've lost control. And indeed, between now and 2020, there'll be another 15% cut on the Ministry of Justice budget. We need to spend money on our prisons. We need our people to come out, educated, rehabilitated, and then integrated back into society. But you won't do that unless you spend the money.
Thank you, Paul. The man there in the striped T-shirt, striped shirt.
Yeah, I think rehabilitation is really important, but at the same time, where does the deterrent kind of start? At the end of the day, if these people are out in, general society in the midweek, we are acting as the prison officers almost, in the fact that we are the people who are in front of these prisoners. They should be, behind bars if they've done something wrong for a set amount of time, where proper rehabilitation can take effect.
Right, so it should be done inside the prison, not outside. Paul Mason, where are you on that?
Well, I'm totally in favour of enforcing the criminal justice system fairly. And, how many constituencies are being investigated at the moment, Amber, for Conservative election fraud? Innocent, of course, until proved guilty. I think it's 29, isn't it? And you'll be the first to say, as a Conservative minister and a Privy Councillor, that if anybody were to be found to have conspired to link those constituencies together so that somebody knew the Conservative Party was overspending at local level, that person should be prosecuted,
What's
shouldn't
this
they?
got to do with Conrad's question?
To do with it?
It's to do with the fact that a lot of young working-class men, and some women, get very criminalised by poverty and hopelessness and living a terrible life, and we should, as you say, rehabilitate them. But we should be investigating the crimes of the rich and the privileged with just the same amount of vigour. Starting with the people who keep their money in Panama.
Can I just say, people are in prison for a reason. I go to school in Walsall and we can't even afford iPads. Working class girls like me and my best friend, we can't learn off the iPads at school. We don't have access to iPads because our school just can't afford it. So why do prisoners deserve iPads, but hard-working girls like me and Ellie don't? Why?
Amber, right.
The purpose of this reform is at the centrepiece of the Prime Minister's desire to give people life chances. And what we're doing is investing money and totally reforming the prison service and the prisons themselves. It's the biggest reform since the Victorian age, to make them fit for purpose so that we don't have the sort of numbers that Paul was quoting about recidivism, about people coming out of jail and just committing crimes. We want to make sure that people get a second chance.
You're going to give her an iPad there?
It's not just that.
Is she going to get an iPad?
Be a lawyer. How am I supposed to learn in my school if I don't have the technology to learn? We hardly have computers at work. We don't have the funding. And I think hard-working pupils deserve that funding, not prisoners who've committed a crime.
Well, I have to say, maybe your school, maybe most schools now. It's a fair point. There has to be equality in this system, and the fact is that a lot of schools now provide iPads as well for their children as they go through. So I hope that the education system can help people access iPads, and if they can't get their own ones, then have good access to computers. There's no question of all prisoners having iPads. Some of the elements of this have been highlighted upon as though this government is going to be soft on crime. We're not. What we're interested in is making sure that people come out educated, they can get jobs, and they can make a useful contribution and not go back to crime.
OK, brief point from you, and then I'll come to you, Tim.
I think that we have to remember that not all crimes are violent crimes. Therefore, you talk about these people being a risk to us. They're not everyone who is in prison is a risk to the outside population. And violent crimes, of course, should be treated inside. But in terms of rehabilitation and allowing people to become a functioning part of society, it simply can't be done when they're being locked away for 23 hours a day in a cell.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Conrad's point, are we being soft on crime? I don't think so. We are being very ineffective on crime, though. Let's look at what prison is for. Three things, really. It is to punish people who have done wrong, to make sure there is justice and the victim gets some reparation, essentially. Secondly, is to protect society from those people who will be a danger to society. And thirdly, it's about rehabilitation. So those people who've been through the prison system come out improved, shall we say, and fully able to function in society. And as has already been said, just about half of the 85,000 people who are currently in prison will reoffend within 12 months. So many of them not violent crimes at all. So what do we do to make sure we make our place, our country safer? Rehabilitation is right and just. It's morally correct to give people a second chance, but it's actually about keeping us safe. Because if people are rehabilitated, they won't offend again, and we as a country will be safer.
Last brief points from our audience. You, sir, there, quickly if you would.
I'm a serving prison officer, so I see it firsthand. I'm all for rehabilitation, but the things you're asking to rehabilitate cannot be done in custody.
Outside of custody, you mean?
They need to be done outside of custody
Okay.
by the time people get into custody and they're onto the longer sentences,
So
you just need staff.
should there be more
What do
community
you think,
sentences?
sorry, what
Is
do you
that-
think of
you
the
think-
suggestions that were put forward by the government for people spending 5 days a week at home working and 2 days under your care in
It
prison?
will not work, because you're not incentivising people to stay at home, you're incentivising people not to come to prison at weekends. It's a punishment system.
OK, I'll take one more point from you there, and then we must stop. Yes, sir.
Isn't this just a publicity stunt? It's one of the few occupations, as Paul said, that doesn't get filled in post. Isn't this the government looking for the general public to do their job?
All right, we'll have to leave that as a rhetorical question, I think, because she can't answer because our time's up. Have to try again later. I'm sorry. It really is our hour finished.